This is Townsquare Sunday on 1420 WBSM, the place where people come together to talk about the good things happening in and around New Bedford.
Come together right now. Oh.
And now, the moderator of Townsquare Sunday, Jim Phillips.
It's Sunday morning. That means it's time for Townsquare Sunday. Good morning. I'm Jim Phillips, and today, a salute to veterans on this Veterans Day. There are numerous parades and events scheduled on the South Coast. Here to tell us about one of them is Joe Langlois, president of the Fort Rodman-Fort Tabor Military Museum in New Bedford. Welcome, Joe.
Good morning, Jim.
This event to commemorate Veterans Day will take place at the museum.
Yes, it will.
Later today.
Later today, beginning at 2 o'clock, although the museum will be open from 10 o'clock in the morning. At 11 o'clock, we will be ringing the bell that we have outside, which it would be nice if all the churches in the New Bedford area would ring their bell 11 times to celebrate the centennial closing of the Great War, World War I.
And this is you mentioned, the 100th anniversary, if you will, of the
close of that war.
The close of that war.
Yes.
And first, let's talk about the ceremony that's happening later today. What is going to be happening at the Military Museum at 2 o'clock?
At 2 o'clock, we have a Mr. Stephen Tabor, who is going to talk about Veterans Day. Now, Mr. Tabor is one of two gentlemen that were appointed by the state of Massachusetts to coordinate centennial activities. And it's really quite an honor to be able to get him to come actually on Veterans Day to speak with us. The other gentleman that was part of this was Lieutenant General Kondrack, who is the historian for the National Guard in Massachusetts, and he also came to the museum to give an excellent lecture on the Yankee Division, which was made up of course, New England men and many from New Bedford, and, really their heroism during that particular war. So Mr. Tabor is coming to do this. I am going to read the poem Flanders Field, as well as give a little history as to how the poem was developed and what's happened with the ceremony that we all see with the red poppy that is sold. In addition to that, we're going to have a little exhibit on Frank Baylis, who was a hero from New Bedford who flew for the French during World War I, shot down several German planes until he himself was shot down by the Germans. In addition to that, we are going to be opening our Armory Room. Our Armory Room is going to be a collection of weapons that we have from the colonial period all the way to modern times. And in the middle of this room, we have 3 machine guns, one from World War II, but 2 from World War I. Whether people are supportive of guns, the reality is that they have become a necessary thing in war. And they would, probably appreciate the presentation that has been made of these military weapons. So I would encourage folks to come down and look at this, look at the Frank Baylis exhibit, and listen to Mr. Tabor, and perhaps listen to my reading of the poem. And we'll also have donuts and coffee.
So, again, this Veterans Day today is really the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I.
Yes,
and it is that was the Great War. That was the war supposedly to end all wars. Of course,
it did not.
Not the case, obviously.
No.
But initially, Veterans Day was known as Armistice Day for many
Correct.
years.
That's correct.
And it was again, I think the great hope in this country was that we would never have to go to war on that scale again. Of course, that the less than 30 years later, we were.
Well, it didn't prove the case. The French laid down hard lessons for the Germans, who, of course, initiated the World War I. And because of that, one of the German soldiers, Adolf Hitler, never forgave the French and, became politically active and, of course, rose to the head of the German nation. And immediately, within a matter of a few decades, World War II began.
World War I and the history of Veterans Day, how did it all come about? Do you have a little bit of history on that?
Well, that is a good question. It very much is related to the poppies, the issue of celebrating the veterans that were essentially wounded and needed assistance. They didn't want to forget the day and what these men had sacrificed, and also what the women sacrificed. There were a lot of nurses that went to Europe to care for the wounded, and as a result of this, the people that saw this and with the issue with the poppies, they made the end of the war the day that these poppies had to be given out. And so because of that, it was memorialized very appropriately by this.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, again, Congress, I guess it was Congress, kind of rule that decided that it will be known as Armistice Day and
right.
Veterans Day. How did it change? When did it change?
Well, really? I don't know the exact date of the change, but the change came relatively late. It's really within the modern period that it became Veterans Day. It was Armistice Day for really decades. And for those who are true believers in history, they would prefer that it stayed Armistice Day as opposed to Veterans Day. Not that there's an issue against veterans, but perhaps another day could have been picked for the veterans of other wars, because this was specifically identified as a result of the struggles during World War I. It's the actual date that the war ended.
And, of course, that war was bloody. It took a terrible toll.
Well, as most
Europe,
wars, millions
sure.
were killed. Millions were killed. Yeah.
It also marked kind of the advent, if you will, of modern weapons and gas and
flamethrowers, the machine gun, the tank.
Yeah, it was all
there.
of
these things were developed during World War I. All of them. And the other thing about World War I, which is politically interesting, is that Europe was ruled by kings and queens, and that came to an end after World War I. The only country that still had kings was England, but even by that time, it was really controlled by Parliament. But there was a big political changes as a result of World War I, huge changes in the world.
You're listening to Townsquare Sunday. I'm Jim Phillips. My guest is Joe Langlois, the president of the Fort Rodman-Fort Tabor Military Museum. And you did mention in your opening remarks your new exhibit.
Yes.
Your armory, if you will.
That's right.
Where weaponry is shown. It's kind of amazing what people bring in to this little museum in the south end of New Bedford.
I agree.
How did you collect this stuff?
Well, it's an old story, but when we started in August of 2008, all we had was souvenirs of various volunteers on card tables, and people came in. Oh, look at this, and they were pleased by it. But we said, how are we ever going to fill this room? And it was filled so quickly that we're literally bursting at the seams. We have items we haven't been able to display. We have a supply room that is jammed with things. Most of it has been brought in. However, some of the weaponry are things that members have seen on the internet that we've had to purchase. Typically, people do not come in and give you a machine gun. All right, so there are things we've seen, and we're able to obtain these things. So, but the vast majority of the items in there, almost 99%, are brought in by local family members. We ask for their pictures. of the, of their dads and brothers and stuff. People do try to bring in now a lot of things, and we simply can't take many things. For example, Eisenhower jackets. Eisenhower jackets, we've had so many of them brought in. We simply can't take any more. We have no room for them. There's only, how many Eisenhower jackets can you put around the museum? You can't put that many.
Right.
So, so because of our limited size, we've had to be very careful about what we admit. Other than pictures, we will absolutely take pictures of anyone serving in the services with the uniform. And they don't have to serve during war. They can serve in peacetime. As long as they are honorably discharged, we'll gladly take the picture and get it up on our wall.
So, for those of you who may not know, this is like perhaps the greatest little museum in the country.
It certainly is it's all volunteer. I don't think there's another all-volunteer museum in the United States that covers the breadth of history that maybe we foolishly try to cover. But we do cover it, from the Revolutionary period to the modern conflicts.
And, it caters really to local soldiers, to people who are in the greater New Bedford area.
Yes, it does.
And that's certainly the bulk, maybe all of the displays are catered around people who...
All of the pictures are local men.
Yeah.
They're essentially all local men. Some of the artifacts which people have, we have a torpedo. There's very few museums that have a torpedo inside. And this was from a local man who served on submarines during World War II, Tony Enos, a fabulous gentleman, if you've ever had a chance to meet him. And he had this torpedo lying by his driveway. And a friend of his, Jimmy Lima, who lived in Fairhaven, said, "You got to get this to the museum now." And so they brought it to Hudner Crane Service because it weighs like 1,900 pounds. Completely redid it, polished up. They went to Propeller Service here in Fairhaven. They polished that up, put it all together. They had a gentleman from the submarine service during the Vietnam era. He looked at it. They did all kinds of necessary work on it, and they brought it to the museum, and there it sits.
There it is. That's just the beauty of this museum. That's really is what makes this museum so special, because it's people donating part of their lives, really.
That's exactly correct. Yes, Jim. Yeah.
And that's what we see. When you go in, you will see pictures and letters and people really bearing their souls here a little bit.
Sometimes people will stand there and cry because they'll see a picture of their uncle. They had no idea their uncle's picture was on the wall.
Yeah. It's a remarkable place, and one I can't say enough about because of what it covers, what it does. But as you say, you're bursting at the seams.
Yes, we are.
Is there a way to expand that museum? You have some. You did it once.
We did do it once. One of the difficulties is that there is a limit as far as the space around the museum. It would probably end up being even more expensive than the last one, which we received tremendous help from the city on that. And Mayor Lang, I can't speak more positively about him. But the issue is that even with the current administration, to try to find individuals who will donate the money and where it's going to go, the architectural concerns would have to participate. It would be, I think, a more difficult process than the last time we expanded.
A hefty sum, even expanding south towards the parking lot.
Well, there is some room there. There is some room. It's not a lot, though. It's nowhere near as large as the room that has been added. Not even close. Yeah. So.
And the room that has been added, I believe, is is that where the speaking programs take place?
Correct.
Yeah, that was added several years ago, and
about 7 years ago.
Yeah, pretty sizable room.
It's a wonderful room. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the last time we talked, you told me and even today, you're saying the same, that there's a lot more stuff you would like to display. You simply don't have the room.
We don't have the room. Things that are really unique, we make sure we get out.
Okay.
You know, for example, our most prized possession is the Medal of Honor from Mr. Downey, who won it during the Civil War. And as a matter of fact, that medal was brought in several years ago during Veterans Day. So who knows? Maybe some other surprising thing will be brought in on Monday.
Yeah.
But we have the actual medal, and it's really our most prized possession. I mean, you're not even allowed to sell it, but to have it as a display so people can see it.
It's a great thing.
It really is a great thing. Yep.
Okay, a special event taking place later today at the Military Museum, Veterans Day, 2 p.m.
Yes.
A speaking program.
Yes.
About World War I, about Armistice Day, if you will.
The importance of it.
Poetry reading by yourself.
Yes.
And also the opening of the new Armory Room.
Yes. And a little display about Frank Bailey's.
Don't forget Frank Bailey.
Don't forget Frank.
And there is a square, of course, a name for him in the North End. Is that correct?
That is correct. Oh, yeah.
Bailey Square.
Bailey Square.
Joe Langlois, thanks for coming in as we salute all veterans on this Veterans Day, and a salute to the Military Museum as well.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Today, 2 o'clock at the New Bedford Military Museum, Fort Rodman-Fort Tabor in the south end of the city. Townsquare Sunday returns in just a moment.